The date was August 22nd, 2007. A summer evening in Liverpool. The kind where children fill the streets with laughter, chasing footballs, riding bikes, begging for just a few more minutes before bedtime. Croxteth was no different. That evening, 11-year-old Rhys Jones left football practice with nothing on his mind but heading home. His boots scuffed, his bag slung over one shoulder, he took a familiar path across the Fir Tree Pub car park. A shortcut he'd taken countless times before. He never made it home. A single shot cracked through the air. One moment he was walking, the next he was on the ground, bleeding, alone, motionless. Seconds later, the street was frozen in shock. Mothers clutched their children. Bystanders dropped to their knees. The kind of scream that stays with you for a lifetime echoed through the neighborhood. And then came the silence. Liverpool had seen violence, turf wars, gangs fighting over reputation, money, revenge. But this was a child. A boy whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The bullet wasn't meant for him, but it ended his life and changed the city forever. That night, every parent in Liverpool looked at their child differently. That night, a city was forced to confront the reality it had long tried to ignore. Rhys Jones wasn't in a gang. He didn't wear colors. He didn't know the boys who carried guns in their school bags. And yet, one of them pulled the trigger. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a turning point, the beginning of a reckoning. Because what followed wasn't just a manhunt. It wasn't just grief. It was a spotlight, bright, unrelenting, and unforgiving, thrown onto a world of teenage enforcers, hidden allegiances, and a community divided by fear and loyalty. In this documentary, we take you inside that world. Through interviews, court records, exclusive footage, and first-hand testimony, we'll piece together the timeline. We'll follow the investigation that led to a 16-year-old gang member named Sean Mercer. We'll meet the officers who refused to let the case go cold, the witnesses who risked everything, the family left shattered. And we'll ask the question that still haunts Liverpool nearly 2 decades later. How did it get this far? This is the murder that changed Liverpool's gang culture forever. The boy whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Rhys Milford Jones. Born September 27, 1995. Quiet, gentle child. The kind of boy who didn't need to be the loudest in the room to be noticed. His smile did the work for him. At school, he was polite, focused. Teachers described him as respectful. His friends called him loyal. Football, though, that was his world. Rhys lived for the game. He supported Everton with the kind of passion only a child could have. Innocent, unshakable, and pure. Match days were sacred. His room was a shrine to Goodison Park. Posters, scarves, jerseys. His dream? To play professionally one day. He never got the chance. That evening, his mum, Melanie, expected him home for tea. She knew the time. She always knew the time. Rhys was never late. But as the minutes dragged, something shifted in her chest. That invisible line between normal worry and maternal panic was crossed, and her instincts were right. Meanwhile, in another corner of the city, police lines were being taped. Paramedics were kneeling next to a boy they didn't yet know. Cameras hadn't arrived. Reporters hadn't swarmed. It was still just another incident, one of many. But this one would be different. This one would break the silence in homes across the country. This one would show a nation that the boundaries between gang violence and innocent life had officially collapsed. The killer wasn't a stranger. He was barely older than Rhys himself.
Sean Mercer.
Just 16 years old. A face that could have been mistaken for any teenager's. He was part of the Croxteth crew, one of 2 rival gangs locked in a bitter feud over territory. Their enemies? The Norris Green Strand Gang. 2 postcodes. A few streets apart. A war measured in arrogance and blood. On that August day, Mercer had one target. A rival gang member. He rode into the Fir Tree Pub car park on a mountain bike, pulled a .455 Smith & Wesson revolver from his hoodie, and opened fire. His aim was off. He hit no rivals. But one of those bullets found Rhys. struck him in the neck as he crossed the car park with no knowledge of what he was walking into. The community was stunned. The public mourned. But the investigation that followed would reveal just how deeply the roots of gang culture had embedded themselves into Liverpool's youth, and how silence, loyalty, and fear had created an invisible wall around Mercer and his friends. In the hours after the shooting, Mercer didn't run. He didn't cry. He hid the gun, changed his clothes, and sent messages to friends to stay quiet. They did. For weeks, detectives met silence at every door. No one talked. Even as the face of Rhys Jones appeared on front pages, even as his grieving parents pleaded on national television, the streets said nothing. The murder of Rhys wasn't just a crime. It was a wake-up call. The kind no city wants. The kind you can't ignore. But to understand how this happened, to truly see the events that led up to that gunshot, you have to go back. You have to see the world these boys lived in. The invisible lines drawn in the pavement. The language coded in hand signs and graffiti. The pressure to belong. The need to protect your own. And the consequences for anyone who didn't. Because in Croxteth and Norris Green, childhood ended early. And loyalty was everything. Before Rhys Jones became a name known across the country, before his mother's tears became a symbol of a city's heartbreak, this was just another turf war. Another postcode battle. But this case, this loss, would force the city to confront what it had ignored for too long. And it all began with a gun, a bike, and an 11-year-old boy who loved football. Paramedics were crouched beside the small figure in the car park, their movements fast but tense. Their faces said everything their mouths couldn't. Rhys lay on the cold ground, his tiny frame surrounded by the chaos of flashing lights, stunned onlookers, and the frantic rhythm of medical intervention. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the concrete. His school bag had been thrown aside in the rush. A football rolled to a stop several feet away. Forgotten. Police began cordoning off the area, eyes scanning for witnesses, for clues, for anything that could explain how a child had just been shot in broad daylight. They weren't just looking for answers, they were desperate for them. The bullet that struck Rhys had been fired by a teenager.
Sean Mercer,
16 years old, a member of the Croxteth crew, a gang that had claimed the streets of this part of Liverpool for years. Mercer wasn't aiming for Rhys. His real target was a rival from the Norris Green-based Strand gang, a feud between two groups of young men locked in a war over territory, pride, and ego. But Mercer didn't hit his mark. Instead, he hit a child. A boy walking home from football practice. And in that instant, everything changed. At home, Melanie Jones was pacing the floor. Every time the phone rang, her heart skipped. But it wasn't Rhys. It was never Rhys. Then came the knock at the door. She opened it to find a police officer standing there. She knew. Before a word was spoken, she knew. As news spread, the city reacted with stunned disbelief. People wept in their homes. Strangers embraced in the streets. Grown men sat down and cried. Rhys's face, still babyish in photographs, was on every front page by morning. 11 years old, slain on his way home. Liverpool was shattered. Detectives faced immediate pressure. This wasn't just a murder. This was a lightning bolt that exposed the reality of gang violence in Liverpool. How it had slithered into the cracks of the community, infecting it quietly, systematically. The gang conflict between Croxteth and Norris Green had been festering for years, often ignored or dismissed as teenage bravado. Now no one could look away. Sean Mercer, in those first few hours, was calm, controlled. He knew the weight of what he'd done, but he also knew how to move in silence. He ditched the bike, burned his clothes, turned off his phone. By the time police had started to pull names together, Mercer was already working on his alibi. And he wasn't alone. A network of gang members, some his age, others older, began closing ranks, lying, destroying evidence, denying everything. The police were up against a wall of silence. Witnesses were terrified. Kids who'd seen the shooting kept their mouths shut. Parents begged them to stay out of it. Nobody wanted to become a target. And Mercer? He watched from the sidelines as Rhys's face blanketed the news. He didn't turn himself in. He didn't show remorse. He stayed quiet. Detective Superintendent Dave Kelly was assigned to lead the investigation. He'd seen many cases, but this one was different. This was personal for the city, for the force, for every single person who'd ever walked that route home after school. Kelly knew from the start this wouldn't be a quick arrest. It would take weeks, maybe months, but he made a promise. They would get the boy who pulled the trigger, and they did. But it didn't come easily. Over the coming weeks, detectives began unraveling the tangled web of lies surrounding Mercer. Phone records, CCTV, forensics, quiet interviews in dark rooms. The walls began to close in. Piece by piece, the truth emerged, not just about Rhys's murder, but about the culture that allowed it to happen. The streets weren't ruled by adults. They were ruled by boys with guns. Boys who saw violence as currency. Respect wasn't earned, it was taken. And no one, not even an innocent child, was off limits. As the investigation gathered momentum, the pressure mounted on those protecting Mercer. His accomplices began to crack. Some talked, some ran. But the circle was breaking, and Kelly was closing in. The day Sean Mercer was arrested, he said nothing. Sat in the interview room, arms folded, jaw locked. But his silence didn't matter. The evidence spoke for him. Ballistics matched the gun. Phone records placed him in the area. CCTV captured his route. And the testimonies, slow, cautious, terrified, began stacking against him. Rhys's family sat through it all. Every detail, every lie, every cold, calculated move. And then came the moment that shook the courtroom. The day Mercer was sentenced. Life. Minimum 22 years. His face stayed stone cold.
No επάλεγε. No.
Just a boy, barely a man, being led away, his future traded for a bullet fired at the wrong target. But the story didn't end with his conviction. Liverpool had changed. The city mourned, yes, but it also woke up. The public outcry forced police to dig deeper into gang activity. Community leaders rose to demand action. Mothers started speaking out. Fathers began organizing. Neighborhoods that once turned a blind eye began standing up. Because Rhys wasn't just a victim. He was a symbol, a reminder that silence is deadly, that ignoring the problem doesn't make it go away. And so the fight began. A real fight. One for peace, for change, for justice that lasts longer than the headlines. The murder of Rhys Jones didn't just take a child. It took a piece of Liverpool. But it also sparked something no bullet ever could, resistance. And that resistance would shape the city's future forever. The moment Mercer pulled that trigger, his life, and the lives of everyone around him began to unravel. But in that split second, he didn't think about that. He didn't see Rhys. All he saw was the rival he believed he could hit from across the car park. A show of strength. A move meant to earn him respect within a broken world where violence was mistaken for power. But the bullet missed its mark. It struck Rhys in the back. A single, hollow-point round, fired from a Smith & Wesson revolver. It tore through his small body, causing catastrophic internal damage. He dropped immediately. Witnesses stood frozen. Some ducked for cover, others sprinted toward him. But cracks had formed, and the truth seeped through. On December 16, 2008, after more than a year of heartbreak, delays, and torment, Sean Mercer was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. Minimum term, 22 years. James Yates and several others who assisted Mercer in the cover-up also received prison sentences. But for the Jones family, there was no relief. There was no sense of closure, because Rhys was still gone. And no prison sentence could change that. The case shocked Britain, not just for the brutality of the crime, but for what it revealed. That armed gangs had taken hold of children. That neighborhoods had been turned into battlefields. That silence had become survival. But Rhys's murder did something else, too. Forced change. Merseyside police launched aggressive new strategies to dismantle the gangs. Community leaders stepped forward. Local youth groups were funded. Schools were given more support. People began to speak. And most of all, Liverpool remembered Rhys. His name became a symbol, not of tragedy, but of transformation. The boy in the Everton shirt, walking home from football practice, became a reason for a city to stand up and say, "No more." A city shaken to its core. Politicians spoke. Police pledged more resources to gang prevention. Community programs sprang up. The Rhys Jones Community Center opened not far from where he died. A place for children to play, to learn, to be safe. For years, Liverpool had lived in the shadow of gang violence. The Croxteth crew and the Strand gang were just two of many. Postcode wars had claimed dozens of young lives. But Rhys, he was different. He wasn't part of it. He was outside of it. And that's what made his death impossible to ignore. In the years since, the city has changed. Gang-related shootings dropped. Community-led initiatives gave at-risk youth new paths. Police worked closer with schools, with families, with faith groups. It wasn't perfect. The scars are still there. But the tide began to turn. Rhys's parents never stopped speaking out. They visited schools, gave interviews, spoke to politicians. Not for vengeance, but for change. To make sure no other child would be lost the way Rhys was. Melanie once said, "We'll never move on. We'll never forget. But we can help other people not go through this." And they did. Rhys's life was short, but it meant something. It woke a city. It shook a system. And it forced people, parents, police, politicians, to face the truth about what was happening on their streets. One boy, one bullet, one tragedy that changed everything. This wasn't just the story of a boy taken too soon. This was the story of a city forced to confront the violence eating away at its streets. Rhys Jones wasn't involved in gang culture. He wasn't in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was exactly where an 11-year-old should be, walking home from football practice. And that's what makes this case different. Because when a community loses a child, something breaks. And when that child's face is splashed across every screen, every paper, every memory, it demands more than mourning. It demands change. So ask yourself this. How many more stories like Rhys's are out there? Unheard, unsolved, unspoken? How many communities are still living in fear, where silence is currency and truth is a risk? If the story moved you, if Rhys's name meant something to you today, don't let it stop here. Speak up. Share his story. Support the families still waiting for justice. And demand more from the systems meant to protect our children. Because remembering Rhys Jones isn't enough. We have to make sure there's never another one.